So please join me in welcoming Nathan.
I'm just going to switch over to my presentation, so bear with me. Just, hopefully this works. All right, modelling is for humans. Now, I'm assuming you can all hear me here. Can you all hear me here? Is this okay? Because I probably won't spend all my time in front of the microphone. It's not a big room, so hopefully you're all happy for me to move around a little. Thank you, Danielle, for that kind introduction. As was mentioned, what I want to talk about today is basically distilling into 45 minutes or so kind of my experiences as a financial modeler over the last 10 years. So I'll do my best to kind of condense it all into this kind of short time frame we have. But basically, I've wanted to do a talk on this kind of topic for a while because I think there's a lot of good courses, talks, sessions, whatever they are about the technical things involved in financial modelling, but what I've kind of noticed is not as much about all the other stuff. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, with the overarching idea that everything we do is ultimately for other people. Modelling is for humans. So how does that then play out in what good modelling looks like? So before I kind of dive into what I want to talk about, I should probably clarify for anyone who might have read the blurb, the kind of description of this talk. Hopefully you got that was very much tongue-in-cheek, you know. I'm not planning today on doing some big client bashing exercise, you know, where clients are always wrong and we're always right, and, you know, how do we deal with these terrible clients? There was a fairly light-hearted introduction to kind of hopefully give you a flavour for this will be pretty much a light-hearted talk. You know, I try and keep things a bit casual. If any questions happen to pop up for you in your head as I'm talking, please feel free to ask them as they come into your head. I don't mind being interrupted. I will, you know, try and have a bit of time at the end for any questions, but you don't have to wait. Don't feel like you have to wait. But I should just clarify now if there's any clients in the room. I don't think there are, but if there's any clients listening at home, you know, anything I have to say today, it's not you, it's me, you know. And if it's negative, it's all those other clients. It's definitely not you, all right? So I should clarify that from the beginning, just in case. But I guess to kick things off, if I'm not going to be talking about all the Excel, what will I be talking about? You know, what am I going to focus on for the next 45 minutes? And I think to help flesh that out, I'll just put a question to the room, a very simple question. Do you need to be great at Excel to be a great financial modeler? Would I get generally yes or no? Yes? Yes? Anyone for no? I mean, hopefully it's an obvious question. I think to be a great financial modeler, it would be very hard if you weren't proficient at Excel. Excel just happens to be the main tool of choice. You can replace Excel there with other programs if you happen to use other programs, but the main point being that whatever tool you're using, it is very important to be great at that tool if you want to build great financial models. I think we'd all agree. But the question I'd have is, does being great at Excel automatically make you a great financial modeler? And hopefully you'll know definitely not. There's all this other stuff that comes along with being a professional financial modeler. And I should clarify, when I say professional financial modeler, all I really mean is building models for other people, whatever context that is. So if your job means that you have bosses or other stakeholders who need to understand your models, you're a professional. If you're at a firm, naturally you're a professional. If you're a freelancer like me, I kind of lump that all into professional financial modeler. You know, if all you do is build spreadsheets that only you have to look at and understand, that I kind of put that in a totally different category. But for those of us who are building models for other people, there's a bunch of other stuff that kind of comes along with that. And my contention is that you need to be great at that other stuff too. And I kind of what I've observed over the 10 years I've been in this game is that there are lots and lots of people who are very good at Excel and lots of people who are very good at the other stuff, but maybe not so many people who are very good at both. And that's kind of where I put the financial modelers. The great financial modelers have found a way to get across both of these elements of that life. And I actually think because it's so rare to find those people who are great at both, that's why financial modelling can be such a lucrative endeavour. You can get paid the amounts that you get paid because there aren't hundreds of thousands of us out there in the world who have nailed both of these things. So I'm going to focus on all the other stuff today, simply because there's plenty of other stuff out there in the world to tell you about how to be great at Excel. Does that all kind of make sense? Everyone happy with that? Hopefully I haven't missold you on this talk and you're all in the right place. The first thing I want to mention about, all that other stuff and what that looks like is that you need to remember who you are, like what your purpose is as a financial modeler. And what I want to clarify is that it's very tempting to think that almost because our title is financial modeler, because the subject matter we deal with is financial stuff, financial statements, financial instruments, financing, projects. It's very tempting to think we're in the finance industry. I think that's kind of what instinctively a lot of people might think. I'm a financial modeler, I work in finance. But actually what I've kind of learned over the years and I guess come to accept is that actually when you're building models for other people, you are in the services industry, specifically professional services. And what you're really doing is you're providing a service to other people, that service being enabling them to make better decisions. And so it's when you kind of realize that actually whilst finance is the subject matter I deal with, professional services is what I am, that kind of then helps you lead to all the things that come along with being a great financial modeler. All that other stuff all comes down to providing a great service to your clients or your stakeholders, whoever is looking at your model. A lot of what I'm going to talk about now in the next 40 to 45 minutes is how do we provide that great level of service, assuming that the technical Excel is also going to be good. So it's kind of subtle, but you're not really in the finance industry, believe it or not, you're in the services industry. And actually, the first thing I kind of want to share about that is in terms of what we create, the kind of artifact, the thing that results from all of our work being the financial model. Ultimately, if we're trying to provide a good service, that model needs to be simple for others to understand. And I often say anyone can build a complex model. It's actually pretty easy to create something in Excel that no one can understand. Like, that's actually really easy. I mean, I could take someone off the street who's not had any training and they could do that, right? And actually, whilst I'm sure you'd all agree that anyone can build a complex model, it's actually a much more difficult task to build a simple model. A model that, despite the complexity of the subject matter you're dealing with, the project that you're trying to reflect, that's always going to be complex. Despite that complexity, how can you create something that still other people can follow along and understand, a simple model? So I kind of say step one to providing a great service is realizing I need to create simple models. This isn't about impressing people with my great Excel skills. I don't care if you could blindfold yourself and build the model without any mouse. All of that stuff, irrelevant to creating a good service. It's about creating models that other people can understand. But I often like to say simple for who, right? No one's ever going to come along to you and say, I want to pay you lots of money to build me a really complex model that I have no idea how it works. I've never had anyone come to me and say that. Everyone's going, I want you to build me a simple model. I want something that I can understand. But what I've learned is the very fact they're coming to me, the very fact that they're coming to anybody else to build the model for them, means the situation they're in is complex. If it really wasn't that hard, they'd do it themselves, knowing how people are. If they could save themselves that budget that they've set aside to pay you, they would, right? So the fact you're in the room and they're even thinking about using you to build a model means you're in a complex situation. But they still want a simple model, right? Oh, question, yeah?
Question. I understand the complex for the modelers, right?
Okay.
But do you have an example for simple for the user?
Yeah. So simple is a fairly vague term, isn't it? Like a client comes to you and goes, I want a simple model. If you said to them, well, what do you mean by that? They probably won't be able to really tell you. How I think of it is I would actually equate, in the context of building financial models, simple rarely just means transparent. Or in other words, able to be followed step by step so that someone who had no involvement in building that spreadsheet can still understand it. And it's quite subtle because I think it's not right to go a simple model has to be small, because the reality is some of the projects you'll encounter require big models with lots of worksheets and lots of like formulas. But to the extent you can, it's almost down to the architecture, lay things out in a simple way, separate things as required so that it's transparent. What I found is when I do that, people then go, yeah, this is simple, I get it, I can follow that, thank you. You know, it's that transparency. So it's almost, whilst I say simple, really you could replace that with transparent and you get to the same place. And so I like to use this kind of classic Boston matrix to try and clarify that there are ways you can kind of get this whole simple model wrong. It's very easy to go, oh, you want a simple model? Great. I'm going to make a very simple model that was simple for me to make. You know, it took me a few hours. It's really crappy, but it, it's simple. At least I can understand it. And I'd actually kind of say, if you focus on keeping things simple for you as a modeler, but end up with something that the user can't understand, that's what I would actually call that bad modeling. That's what bad modeling looks like. You know, you're sacrificing the experience of your client, the service you're giving to them is being sacrificed to make your life easy. So I kind of say, we don't want to be there. Some people then go, oh, you want a simple model? That's good. You want things to be simple for you? I want things to be simple for me. Let's find a way to do this really in a rudimentary way and still you understand it. I mean, I don't deny that is a good aspiration, but in my world, I find that you're just dreaming. And again, it comes back to the fact if they've come to you, it's not going to be easy for you. If it was easy, they'd just do it themselves. So you kind of end up having to pick between these two options, being I'm going to do some good modelling here, and by good I mean create something that's transparent and creates a good experience for my client, or I'm going to end up in a nightmare. And to be brutally honest, I've had my fair share of nightmares as I've learned the hard way through my days at KPMG and PwC. You know, I learned the hard way what it looks like to be in a nightmare. And that's where things are hard for me, and what I've ended up building, nobody understands, everybody's losing, nobody's happy, it's a nightmare, you know? It kind of, you have nightmares. Whereas what I'm going to try and share with you over the time we have together is, okay, what can you do to try and make sure you end up in this quadrant, you know? Sure, things might be hard for you, complex for you, you have to grapple with complexity, but if you can get through that and still end up with something simple or transparent, then you're in that quadrant. That's kind of what we should all be aspiring to do, I would say.
Can I ask you about
your question, yeah.
What is transparency to you?
So transparent, I kind of think about, if you think about a spreadsheet that you know, has all its inputs and calculations and outputs and charts or whatever it is. If someone who had no involvement in building that spreadsheet, so they didn't type a single formula, they're a complete outsider, if they can still follow through the logic of what's happening, I would say you've built a transparent model. Conversely, if someone opens the spreadsheet that you build a model and they go, I have no idea what I'm looking at, I don't know where to start, I don't know where to finish, I don't know what to do in between, I'd say that's not a transparent model. So yeah, does that help? Yes? Yeah, cool. So it's not about, you know, making the fill of every cell transparent and the font transparent and suddenly my model's transparent. You know, it's about I'd say simplicity, transparency, the ability to walk through step by step. And
trust. It's about trust.
Oh, big time. And I actually think transparency in your modelling helps create trust. And given we're in a kind of human-to-human relationship at the end of the day, trust is what's going to underpin it in a professional sense. If they trust your skills, and that you know what you're doing, and you're not trying to hide anything or bamboozle them with all this wizardry in Excel. That actually creates a much better experience for your ultimate stakeholders. And I'll actually get back to that topic in a few slides because it's a big part.
You know your customers.
Big time, yeah. And I in a few slides, I'm actually going to get them. I mean, I feel like everyone has totally anticipated this whole talk.
We've all been there.
Which on one level is good, right? It means we're amongst friends, it's a trusted room, you can feel free to share things. I think we're all on the same wavelength about being good at Excel is important, but all this other stuff is what makes or breaks a project when it comes to financial modelling. So I'm going to share, I guess, what I've learned over the years. I don't actually profess to have nailed all of this. I still have my struggles. But I'd encourage you, kind of as you have, share back too. If I'm talking about something and you've got a bright idea or something you've experienced at work, please feel free to yell out and let's kind of all learn from each other. But moving on, I actually think we're going to get to all these things we're mentioning, but I like to, before really diving into the what of financial modelling, the methodology as you mentioned, I think it's really important to understand the why. Why do we build financial models? Because I think once you have really good clarity on why am I building this in the first place? Why has someone come to me and asked for this? A lot of the kind of what and how just kind of falls out naturally. And I often, when I'm teaching at a uni or in whatever context, I like to use this fireman's analogy. And you might think, what's a fireman got to do with building financial models? But if you've kind of followed along with any of the stuff on behavioural economics, you might have encountered that classic analogy of, the firefighters turning up to a burning building and one of the firefighters just almost instantaneously says, you know what, we can't go in. It's too dangerous, we're not going in. And to the novice or the outsider, you might wonder, well, how did you make that decision so quickly? And a lot of behavioural economics has been trying to unpick how our brains work, how we're able to do that, how experts can handle that. But from a financial modelling perspective, I like to think of it as in business, just like with firefighters, often decisions are made very quickly and very instinctively, and it's kind of like, you know what, based on my years or decades of experience, I just know this is not a good idea, and boom, decision made. Whereas if that is the way decisions are made in a business context, whilst they may be right, it's very hard to challenge them, it's very hard to have a conversation about them, it's very hard to pick apart the assumptions underlying that and test them. And ultimately you find yourself just at the whim of whoever has made the decision, and normally that happens to be the person with the highest authority, and whether that's the best decision may not be the case. And what I've found is that the why, the reason often people want financial models, the reason why I'm often asked to build them, is to create this tool, this artifact, this thing, this spreadsheet that allows you to pick apart the assumptions underpinning a decision and let everybody have a look and test and try and break. And, eventually you'll get to a decision and it might still be the same decision you would have got to otherwise, but at least everybody understands the process. And because that's why we need models, to kind of get things out of people's head and onto a format that we can all look at, that's the reason why transparency becomes so important. Because if you end up building something that no one can understand, you've completely missed the purpose of why we needed that model in the first place. Because it's all about the collaborative decision making and the testing of assumptions. So a lot of what good financial modeling looks like is all about going, does this approach that I've taken to building this model help other people understand what's going on? Does that kind of make sense? So I kind of try and always go back to the fireman because it kind of helps remember why we're doing this in the first place. Now, once we're kind of happy with the why, we kind of then get to, okay, so what's that methodology? How do we go about this? And this is a simple diagram. You may have seen something like this before. I think someone during the early questions already mentioned that a good thing, a hot tip to do with building your models is to separate your inputs from all your other stuff. And I often like to draw up this diagram when I'm meeting clients, particularly new clients, to say, you know what? The situation you're in is complex. Let's just say I'm about to build a public-private partnership model with a securitized lease structure, and I've been asked to help build that model. That's a complex situation. But fundamentally, what I'm going to build is going to be made up of three things: inputs, calculations, and outputs. And every model, no matter whether it's one worksheet or 100, inputs, calcs, and outputs. Now, naturally, when I'm building that model, I have to start by getting all the inputs into the spreadsheet so that I can create calculations that point to those inputs, and then create outputs that, rely on the calculations. That's just how you have to build models. There's no getting around that. But what I find is where maybe the new financial modeler, the novice, someone who might not have been trained yet, the fundamental mistake I think they make is they also design the model from the inputs. So they're about to start a modeling project, and the first question they ask is, what are the inputs? What data do you have? And you might end up building a beautiful spreadsheet with nice techniques, and it's all very impressive, but it doesn't answer the question or help with the decision that needs to be made. And so I often say, when building models, we design backwards from the outputs. And I think a lot of you nodding probably already agree. That's where you begin. Begin with the end in mind. If you've read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, you'll see begin with the end in mind is one of his habits. I've kind of ripped that off and put it in a financial modeling context. Begin with the end in mind. Design backwards from the outputs. And it's only really once you have a clear view of what this model has to do, what the outputs have to be, that you can then start talking about inputs and where you're going to get your data. I often, if I have the luxury of a whiteboard, will literally say to a client, pretend that whiteboard is one of the worksheets in your model, the output sheet. What needs to be on that whiteboard for you to make the decision? And we just work backwards from there. And that kind of leads me to my next point, which is that whenever you're building a financial model, you hit the whiteboard before you hit the keyboard. So one of the mantras that I try and really just drill into all my MBA students is whiteboard before keyboard, whiteboard before keyboard. I think we'd all agree that a key tool in every financial modeler's toolkit is their keyboard, their kind of Excel, their computer. But I actually think the most powerful tool that a financial modeler has is the whiteboard. This is where your model really begins. And actually, I often say to my students, until you have complete clarity on what you're about to do on the whiteboard, until you can handle every little question that might pop up, you're not ready to hit the keyboard. And that can be scary, like in a practical sense, that can be scary. Like if you've been given, let's call it 3 weeks to build a financial model, and it's Friday of the first week, maybe your client wants to see some progress, and they go, can you show me how you're going? And you just show them a whiteboard with some drawings. That's scary, but that's the reality. The more time you spend upfront planning well, the smoother that process of build. The Excel's the easy bit, really. Like I often say that to clients, the Excel is the easy bit. Trust me, I can do the Excel. What I need to do is get out of your head and onto that whiteboard everything you need to know, and also how your business works, because I don't profess to be an expert in any particular industry. I'm a generalist, so I need to also sit with my clients, the subject matter experts, and get out of their head how this all works. And again, whiteboard before keyboard, I've found, almost unequivocally ends up in a better process, a better experience for everyone with building models. So whiteboard before keyboard, whiteboard before keyboard. Now, that's kind of the preliminary stuff I wanted to mention. It sounds like most people are in agreement with me. There's no one, violently disagreeing yet, which is good. Now what I want to do is start to talk about some of those realities of being, I guess, a professional modeler. And this is particularly in the case of if you're at a firm or you're a freelancer and, you're kind of building models for clients in the classic sense. Because at the end of the day, there are 3 levers you have to work with to get any project going in terms of the quality of the experience that your client will kind of have when all is said and done. It's a function of the time, scope, and cost, and how all those move together. This is you might have seen a diagram like this before. And I want to spend a little time fleshing out how all these things play out as a financial modeler. So we have 3 levers to work with, but the reality is clients only really get to pick 2. You know what I mean? And I love this diagram because it gets it so right. You know, if you want something that's good and cheap, and by good, you can just replace that with transparent, simple, you know, all those things we've been talking about. That's what good means in our context. Good and cheap isn't going to be fast. Fast and good won't be cheap. Cheap and fast won't be good. You know, and I've seen that truth play out in I guess my reality. Now, at the end of the day, clients come wanting all three. And so as a professional, a big part of the skill is to be able to manage their expectations, set the realistic reality that you're really only going to get two. If you've come to me and you need this model tomorrow, you know, it needs to be fast, kind of either, you know, it's not going to be cheap or it's not going to be good, you know, like what do you want, you know? And you know, we'll talk more about cost and scope and that kind of thing, but if you want something and you're not happy with the price I'm giving you, then don't expect it to be good or fast. You know, like this really captures it. Now, the reality is you cannot just show this picture to your potential client and go pick two and let's talk, you know? It's much more subtle than that, and that's where a lot of the skill comes in. You know, we're modeling for humans, you know, emotional, irrational at times humans. You can't just have this conversation even though that's the conversation you need to have, right? So what do? I mean, I'll focus first on good, you know, the good of those three levers, and I often like to think about it when you're talking about a model, negotiating how it's all going to play out. Often it comes down to scope. So often you go, oh, you need a model, what do you need that model to do? If it's got to be fast and it's got to be cheap, then the only lever I've got to play with is the scope, right? And let's talk about scope. And I actually, when I first moved from KPMG to PwC, day one, it's no exaggeration, they'd already had a project lined up for me called Project Purple. And they, no exaggeration, said to me, we need a financial model in 3 days. Three-way integrated model. One of those classic nightmares of, it was kind of, I was in the modeling team, like a kind of dedicated deals modeling team. This particular client was actually another part of the firm in what's called middle markets. And basically what had happened is they'd already spent 2 to 3 months trying to build this model, and they kind of got to the point where they realized it was too hard. So that kind of 3 months of time that was originally planned, it would have been about the right amount of time, they'd run out. Budget, run out, already spent, trying to do it and fail. So they come to the experts, and my new partner is kind of, you know, gave me a hospital pass. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. You know, you're playing football, someone's charging at you, and that guy's got the ball, he just throws it to you, right? And you're going to hospital, like a hospital pass. So they're like, look, you got 3 days, you got no budget, and, you know, give us three-way integrated financial model, the kind of most classic kind of thing you might have to build.
Try building it in 4 hours.
Oh, well, yeah. And I'm going to talk about time because it's an interesting thing, but what do you think my instinct was to do in that situation? As a professional, I kind of learned the trade, still many mistakes to make, but kind of thought I knew what I was doing. Thought, well, let's talk about scope, right? Because that's the only lever I've got to play with. I said, what do you really need this model for? It's to make a decision of all things, whether their client should invest in toilet paper. You know, start a toilet paper manufacturing business. All right, well, what do you really need to know? Well, is it going to send us broke? I'm like, so it sounds like cash flows are the most important thing. How about I just build out a cash flow model? Don't worry about the income statement, balance sheet, and integrating it all. In 3 days, let's be realistic. Immediate stakeholders said, yeah, beautiful, let's do it. Finished the first day at 3 a.m, came in about 8 or 9, did it all again, got a model out. What do you think the first question was that I got from the partner?
Where's the P&L?
Where's the balance sheet, actually? But, you know, I was talking with the P&L, and I'm like, well, what do you expect 3 days? And then, you know, they're like, oh, have another week to finish it off. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me that from the beginning? So, anyway, all I would say is when you're in a situation where you think scope might be the lever that you're going to play with, be very careful, because I kind of think about models like bridges. You know, a 95% built bridge is useless as no bridge at all. You can either walk across it or you can't. And models are the same. It either does everything you need to answer the question that needs to be answered, or it doesn't. You know, being able to go, well, I've done 95% of it, kind of pretty useless. So if you're in that situation where you're tempted to negotiate down scope, be very careful because you may end up just wasting everybody's time. You know, better to run than kind of use that as your lever. The other thing about scope that I've learned the hard way is you can ask a client, do you want the model to do this? Do you want the model to have a scenario manager with 100 scenarios? Do you want the model to have room for 50 tranches of debt? Do you want the model to have a fully, dynamic dashboard? And what do you reckon the answer is to all of those questions? It's yes, of course, yes. If you thought of it, yes, please, of course. If you ask, do you need the model to have that? You may still get the answer yes, but at least you're making them think about it, right? And I've seen that if I just make that little subtle change, at least I'm getting them to think, okay, do I really need that? Oh yeah, if I get him to do that, it might take more time and cost more money, let me think about that. So I never, ever now will ever ask the client, do you want? Never. It's always, do you need? So that's my hot tip, if you're going to remember anything, really easy to do. It's not what you want, it's what you need. That's kind of when it comes to scoping. Okay, that's scoping. Now I just want to talk a little bit about time, because that's the other problem that you're going to encounter as a professional, Do you have enough time? I don't know if anyone's seen this kind of going around the web, but I love it, right? Because it captures everything about what I experience when trying to deal with ridiculous deadlines. And here, in case you haven't seen it, the basic idea is you give a great cartoonist 10 minutes to draw Spider-Man, he's going to do a pretty good job of drawing Spider-Man. Give that same cartoonist with the same level of skill 1 minute, not a bad job, not as good a job, but not a bad job. Give them 10 seconds, a kindergarten child might have drawn that. You know what I mean? And it's the same with financial modelling. You could be the best Excel jockey in the world with all decades of experience. If you're not given enough time, no amount of skill is going to end up with a good financial model. So there's like this minimum threshold that you should never be tempted to give into. If I'd known any better when I first went to PwC, I just would have said, no way, 3 days, you're kidding. I'm just going back to KPMG. You know what I mean? If I was really smart, I would have, maybe thought about that. But we all have to learn the hard way. So I kind of think when it comes to time, there's always going to be pressure. You're never going to be given enough time or the amount of time you think you need, because it's all going back to the fact that chances are they've used it all up, trying and failing themselves. And they're coming to you because they're in trouble, they're desperate, they need a pro, thinking that a pro can draw Spider-Man like this, whether I give you 10 seconds or 10 minutes. And that's the trap that you need to not fall into yourself, but also delicately explain to your client. I've often found most deadlines, nearly all deadlines, I won't say all, but most, they're arbitrary. They're giving you a week because they don't know how good you are, and you've really got 2. They're like, I better just tell them 1, so that if they're no good, I've got a bit of a buffer. That's normally what's happening. And so if you can very delicately go, I often will use words like, so what's driving that deadline? Now, I won't say, that's ridiculous 1 week. I'll go, what's driving that deadline? Because often you can get out of their head, okay, this is arbitrary, let's be realistic, we've got 2 weeks, trust me, I'm not going to just sit on my hands and charge you more because I've got 2 weeks. We need the 2 weeks. So time's always going to be tough. I still have difficulty with it even now, but it's kind of like if someone's pressuring you on the time, alarm bells should start going off. And really everything I'm talking about tonight is what are all the things that should trigger alarm bells? And if they go off and you can run, then run. That's basically, that's my takeaway, run if you can. But time is always tough. And actually on that topic of time, and we hinted at it earlier, there's this kind of weird, I don't know what to call it, like dynamic in the financial modelling world where speed and how fast you can do things is equated with your ability. And I've kind of seen it play out in, people's desire to be great at Excel shortcuts so that they can spin stuff up really quickly. When I'm testing, so even when I'm testing interviewing candidates, it's a time test. My exams are timed for my students. Modelling competitions, timed, and often really tight time. There's just this underlying assumption that faster is better. But what I've found is actually, as a professional building models for others, the whole carpenter's adage of measure twice, cut once, the whole slow and steady wins the race, actually is the far better way to think about it. So often with my MBA students, I'm trying to teach them everything I can to force them to slow down. You know, hit the whiteboard before the keyboard to slow down, think about what you're doing. Even at the formula level, you're about to write a new formula about whatever it is, sketch it out on a notepad, make sure you've kind of thought about what you're doing, and then build it, you know? When I'm walking through models with others, I almost will try and stop myself using any keyboard shortcuts, and I'll be slow with the mouse to help people follow me. You know that, like a lot of that assumption that you need to be fast to be good, if you're not fast at what you're doing, you're definitely not good. I actually don't think that plays out in reality. So you've got to try and just temper that and don't give into it. Realistically, time is always going to be a challenge, and you don't want to be slow about things, but you shouldn't be, there's no shame in going, you know what, I'm gonna think about this and be careful about this, measure twice and cut once. And actually you'll find you get through the whole process of modelling actually quicker at the end of the day because you're spending less time unpicking errors. Yeah, question?
Nathan, can we, like the industries, I normally do the model of different stages, right?
Uh-huh.
So I work with my clients.
Yeah.
Like the first one would be rough, let them test it, and then change it, ask for more and more in the end, because the model exactly what they want to test.
Yeah. I the way I articulate it, and it's not the nicest way, but I often say clients don't know what they really want until they've seen what they don't want. You know, it's not until you put something in front of them they go, oh no, actually that's not what I wanted. And the balance you're trying to strike is to get enough out of their head to get that first cut that you do close enough to have a sensible conversation, knowing that there's going to be more changes to come. And so a lot of the methodology I follow and teach is about minimizing the change and the pain of having to update, knowing that you can never avoid it to start with. So sometimes it depends on the project, but I might say, look, let's build a prototype model or a proof of concept of something, make it really quick, like in startup language, they call it the minimum viable product of your model. If that's worth doing, and you know you've got the right time budget, it's worth doing. I often find my method is I'll hit the whiteboard before the keyboard, and sometimes I'll draw up what I call a driver tree or a logic map. It kind of almost lays out, here's all the things that this model will calculate, and here's even the high level logic, not in Excel yet, but just logically. What I'm going to do, have I missed anything, does it all make sense, is that all good? And build the model, but make sure I kind of do that bit, knowing that I need a buffer at the end for those changes. So if I've got 2 weeks, I don't take the full 2 weeks to get the first cut. Yeah.
I'm quite sure you come across sometimes, I know what I want, what the client wants. I don't know what does he look like yet.
Yeah, okay.
So he said not transparent.
My advice would be you're not ready to hit the keyboard yet. That's kind of what I'd say in a purist sense. I'd say if you haven't got that clarity of this is exactly what I'm about to build, down to the chart, you know, the worksheets, have it all mapped out on some format, whiteboard, whatever it is. It might be a bit premature to jump into Excel. I mean, there are many people out there who do anyway, and they'll still find a way through. I would just say you might be going through more pain than you have to, kind of diving in, getting something, being so far away from what's really needed that the amount of changes you require are more than they have to be. So I think we'd all know and agree changing a model is far harder than building from a blank canvas. So to the extent you can minimize those changes, everybody's life's going to be easier. That's kind of how I think about it. Measure twice, cut once. Don't fall into the temptation of having to be fast because that's what people think is good. Now back onto this topic of trust and credibility and all that kind of thing. This is a diagram I actually encountered first. I think it was at PwC. We're starting some training there, and I kind of talked through this diagram, and it's always stuck with me because it's really nailed it in terms of that kind of journey that you go on as someone building models for other people. So we call it the cliff of credibility, and the basic idea is that you kick off a modeling project, whatever it is, for your boss or for a client, and you start off with some level of credibility. And that's based on maybe your reputation, what people have heard about you, or your prior work, whatever it is. And the idea is that as you do good work, provide good service, follow your methodology, you kind of move your way up this credibility curve until that oops moment happens, whatever it is. In our world, mostly a mistake has been found in your model, something's wrong with your model. And suddenly, you're forever tainted as you're that guy that built that model that doesn't work, And you really only have a few choices to handle that. I mean, you're in nightmare territory, it's no fun. But you can either get someone independent to come in and test your model and try and find all the other errors and create some comfort that, we found all the problems. You can even try and rebuild the model to whatever extent you can. But neither of those things will ever get you back on the path of, that trajectory you would have been on in terms of creating or providing a great service for your clients and building up your credibility. And so a lot of what I try and do, and particularly that idea of slow and steady, measure twice, cut once, it's not just about things being smoother and faster, it's also a risk management tool because you want to do everything you can to minimize making errors in the first place. Now, as humans, particularly those of you who are familiar with behavioral economics, you kind of know we're all going to make mistakes. It's just our fallibility. But if you can minimize the chance of that, and then maximize the probability that you find the error before anyone else does, you're going to have a long and happy career, But if you're kind of rushing and taking shortcuts and, I guess not being disciplined, good modeling is really, a lot of it comes down to discipline. You're going to find yourself making mistakes more often than not that people find before you do. And that's kind of no fun. So a lot of what I'm talking about, it's partly risk management as well and thinking about your longer term career and your brand almost, the brand that you're building up. So definitely you've got to think about that. So that's kind of, I guess, scope or how good the model is, how much time you have and how to think about that. Last one I want to talk about is that cost question, because I guess all I know from my experience is that if I come in and go, this is how much I think it'll cost, and I get no pushback, then I've gone too low. You know what I mean? Like, if I go, oh, this will be, I don't know, $1,500 a day, and I go, oh, please start tomorrow, then I should have made it $1,500 or whatever, But actually, very rarely do I get that. It's almost the opposite. I'll give them my rate, and I go, really? That's how much? Really? I get pushback on cost almost without fail. And I came across this tweet. I'm not actually on Twitter myself, but I saw this somehow. It might have been a LinkedIn or something. This guy, he's in the context of being a writer, but he totally nails it, where he goes, if I do a job in 30 minutes, because I spent 10 years learning how to do that in 30 minutes, you owe me for the years, not the minutes, right? And that's the constant tension I face as a professional. People want to pay me for the minutes. They don't care about the years I've spent building up the ability to do what I'm about to do. And I found that in the financial modelling context, the only way I can really try and deal with that or the way it plays out is in the rate I choose. So never will I accept a fixed fee. I'll run. If someone goes, can you just build this model? Should be easy, it'll be quick. What do you reckon, 10 grand? I always go, let me tell you all the other people you should talk to, sorry, I'm too busy or whatever. But so I'm always going for time and materials, but then the challenge is, okay, well, what rate? Whether it's an hourly rate, a daily rate, a weekly rate, it doesn't matter. But my advice, what I find kind of works, or what strikes at least a happy balance, is that you need to pick a rate that you believe values the years and stick to your guns. And the scary thing about that is someone comes to you with an opportunity for work, you tell them the rate, they're not so happy with it. The temptation is, well, maybe I should come down because at least I'm getting some work, at least that money's better than no money. What happens if no other opportunities come for a while? That's the tension, that's the anxiety. But all I can say is, in my experience, never have I said no to someone who wanted to cheap out on me and not had someone else come along willing or more ready to pay my rates. So there's no right or wrong answer for everyone in that context, and it really only applies more to the firm, people working at firms or as freelancers. You know, when you're paid a salary, it's all moot at that point. But kind of just don't forget, you want to be paid for the years, not the minutes. That's kind of how I'd like to, that's how I think about costs. That's the advice I'd give. And that kind of brings me on to, they're the three kind of main things you need to be thinking about around all that other stuff with building models. But there's a few final things I'd like to kind of touch on about things that just send alarm bells ringing, that I would say my advice is to run, right? And the first phrase or sentence that I hear that just means I'm never taking on that work is when someone says, this should be easy. So if you can imagine the way the conversation goes, actually, I had a real conversation just last week. I got a call. One of my former MBA students is one of the people who set up Expert 360, and they were like, come on, Nathan, get on the platform. So I did. So I'm on Expert 360. I get a call from them last week going, we have a client who urgently needs a specialist modeler in receivables finance. Can you do it? And you know, the way the conversation plays out is, well, how long do you have? You know, it's not realistic. You know, I think you need more time. Okay, what's the rate they're asking for? Okay, that's a bit low. And the response is, but this should be easy. No, what do you mean? What do you mean you need $2,000 a day? This should be easy? I mean, the real answer is if it's so easy, do it yourself. You know, like it's the kind of, that's the answer you want to say, but you can't say. So you kind of go, I know in my head I'm saying no to this work. The only question is, how do I say no without burning the bridges, without making the enemies, knowing that they might come back later with another piece of work that's actually not ridiculous. But if someone's telling you this should be easy, you really should beware, because you know that they're coming to you because it's not easy. As I've said over and over, the fact they're asking you means it's not easy. This should be easy is a crude negotiating tactic to try and get you down on time or cost or both. So be very careful if you hear those words. I would say just do whatever you can to not do that work.
Or it's urgent. I think that's the other.
Oh, it's urgent for sure, you know, and it's normally, it's urgent. What do you mean that's not enough time? This should be easy, you know, they go hand in hand, you know. When you hear both, like, that's just run. Now, there's a great video on this, I won't show it, but there's, I don't know if anyone's seen it, I took a screenshot from it, it nails it. So if you want, I can tell you the link later. But there's a great video that just nails it. Now, the other one is if someone comes to me and says, I just need you to update my model, that's code for I need you to fix up my mess. You know, it's the Titanic sinking, basically, the financial modeling equivalent. There's nothing worse. There's nothing that I enjoy less in my role than having to update other people's models, you know? Because the reason, again, that they need you to update it is because they've stuffed it up. You know, and often they just think magically somehow because you're the professional, you're the expert, you can just wave a wand over it and suddenly it's all good again. So I try and run again if I can, but if you don't have that option for whatever reason, I find the best way to handle these situations is to say, yes, I'll update your model, but you just build it again from scratch. You know, start again. And you can't actually tell the client that. You go, okay, I think it would be better if we just start again. They'll go, what are you talking about? You know, it took me 3 months to get to this point. We don't have 3 more months. What's wrong with you? Or you're just trying to gouge me for fees. You're trying to, you know, create more work for yourself. They're never going to accept you saying, I'm just going to start again. But if you tell them, I'll update your model, but what you really do is just start again, I've never had a client complain to me going, oh, why'd you do that? They're just happy that they now have a working model. They probably don't even know that that's what I've done, right? That's my hot tip. Run is advice number one, but if you can't, you know, then just build it from scratch, because building a model from scratch is infinitely easier than all the time you're going to waste unpicking whatever random errors they've thrown in there. And then you're also at risk that if you take their model as your starting point and update it, and don't pick up every problem that was in there, suddenly it's your model now, and you're going back to that credibility curve, and suddenly that's you. You know, you don't always lose credibility for reasons that are your fault. I mean, my first job at KPMG, the first model I ever was asked to build where someone paid me, it was out of Qantas, bring your own device policy. They were all on Blackberries back then, and people discovered their iPhones and they wanted to bring their own phones to work. And the project was basically to model out the transition to BYOD. I was asked to build a pretty quick model, as they always have to be, to help compare the BlackBerry versus Optus versus Telstra, and I did that. And I was a novice back in my rookie days. For whatever reason, I couldn't even tell you right now, I put macros in that model. And I try and avoid macros and only use them when they're really necessary, but back then I hadn't learned that lesson yet. Put macros in there, email out the model to everyone, here's the model, have a look, let me know what you think. And almost immediately I get a reply all saying the model is broken. And this is an email chain that includes the chief information officer, all these high up people. I'm just a junior trying to make it in this world. And this Qantas person is killing me, right? And so I go right over to them, I go, okay, what's the problem? Only to discover they just hadn't enabled macros because they didn't know you had to do that. And I'm like, you're killing me, but that kind of technically wasn't my fault, but it kind of was because I should have known better. And picking up someone else's model that has problems because they're asking you to fix it, taking on the reality of fixing it, and then suddenly they discover an error that you never planted, you should know better because that's going to be pinned on you. So again, I always say run if you can, if you can't, build it from scratch. All right, coming towards the end now, I know I'm going a little over time, but I'm kind of nearly there. I've kind of alluded to this already, but the most powerful word you could learn as a professional modeler, someone who builds models for others, is no. Hopefully you can get it. The problem is you can't just be that blunt, can you? Unless you want to lose your job or never get another client, if you just go no, 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 it's not really going to end well. But my advice is you don't also want to go to that other extreme where all you say is yes, 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 yes. You've got to strike that balance. It may be tempting to go, I'm just going to become a yes man or whatever because I see other people do it. Seems to work out for them. I would say if you want a long and happy career as a financial modeler, you need to master the art of telling people no without making them angry. And again, I don't think there's only one way to do that because the key to it is being genuine, and what that will look like is different for everyone based on your personality and your style. But fundamentally, if you can learn how to say no and still keep people happy, you've kind of basically mastered the art. That's kind of how I say it. Now for me, what works for me, the first kind of port of call I love to use is the classic, love to help you, I'm just too busy. And I can do that as a freelancer because I don't have a boss sitting over me who has visibility on what I'm doing. Clients don't know whether I'm busy or not. Actually, when I say I'd love to help but I'm too busy, that almost makes them jealous. They're like, oh man, I really want this guy now. He's so busy, everybody's using him and I'm missing out. But I find that's my first port of call. If I can kind of just go, love to help, just don't have the bandwidth, let me give you a bunch of people who might be able to help you. And even then, if I'm really their good friend, I try not to lob them with the hospital pass. You've got to strike a balance. Oh yeah, Danielle often no. But you got to not avoid one enemy to just make another one. But I'd love to help. I'm just too busy. It is a way that I found works. It might work for you, it might not. You just got to try it and see. If that fails, I do have a famous/infamous 6-step program of all the things I say to try and convince this client that they don't want to use me. That's kind of how I go about it. So is your work urgent? Run. Sorry, I don't do urgent work. I need a month's notice. I'm so busy. You need fixed fees. I only do time and materials. Do you need a specialist? I'm just a generalist. All these little reasons to say, actually, you don't want me. And sometimes, this can backfire because they're like, this guy's playing some really good reverse psychology game. And actually, so right now, I've been spending my time at Booktopia. That's the kind of client that's been taking up most of my time recently. And man, I didn't seek out this work. It was actually one of my old friends goes, I'm too busy for this work, Nathan, do you want to do it? And he told me, he's like, it should be just 2 to 3 days, it should be easy. All the classics, right? But I'm like, this guy, is good friend, want to help him out. Okay, I'll have a chat to these guys. I was then asked, do you want to come meet the CEO, have a meet and greet and see if, it's going to work? And I'm just thinking I'm getting ready for a casual coffee with someone who might want to use my work. Rock up to their office in Lidcombe to discover it's the CEO, the CFO, the Chief Technology Officer, some financier and me, right? Panel interview. And they open up with the question, why would we use you? Why wouldn't I just get an e-commerce specialist? Right, that's kind of how they open. To which I said, of course, if you can get an e-commerce specialist, use them. Don't use me, like use them, right? That was all I said. To which most of the rest of the meeting was, don't use me, like that's not me, right? I walked out thinking, well, that's definitely not going to happen, kind of somewhat thankful. Only 2 weeks later, they sent me an email going, congratulations, you've won the work, when can you start? And I'm like, what happened? And I rock up, and the financier is like, you probably want to know how you won this work, right? And I'm like, yeah, like, I'm not going to lie, like, I have no idea why you picked me. They're like, they were so refreshed with your honesty. They asked that same question to everyone. Everyone else just tried to fake it and talk about things that had nothing to do with e-commerce. You were the only one who said, yeah, I don't know e-commerce. So it totally backfired, I tried to push them away, it didn't work, so I'm not claiming that this is a perfect solution, but actually more often than not it does. It kind of, it's a nice way to just push people away, make them think they don't want you. That's kind of, it's the only other way I've worked out to try and say no without using that word no. And that actually is it in terms of, what I wanted to talk about. I know we've gone a little over time, so I'm sorry, but if there are any lingering questions, feel free to ask now, and I'll always hang around after. So if you have any questions that, are specific to you, feel free to come ask, and, happy to answer. Oh yeah, question, great.
Yeah, when you're doing, say you're doing a simple Excel model, and
it's the only way I know, yeah.
You've got inputs, calcs, and
outputs, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're on 3 tabs.
Yeah.
Is that the way you would order them? You'd have like you say, you're sending it out to someone and you want them to know that this is the first thing you're going to do inputting stuff. Or do you put your outputs at the front?
Yeah, so that you basically articulate the 2 key options.
Yeah.
You can go inputs, calcs, outputs in that order.
Yes.
Or you can go outputs, inputs, calcs in that order.
Yeah.
Now, actually, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. There's very few kind of hard and fast, this is definitely right or wrong in Excel.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the great part of being a modeler is that creativity and that open-ended nature to the problems. How I think about it is I go, what's best for the client? So if all they care about is the outputs, put them first, because that's what they're going to want to look at. Almost the calculations are a black box, they just trust that they work. If something goes wrong, they'll look at them and be able to follow them. But otherwise, if everything's looking as it should, they may not even open the calcs. And for me, I normally will try and work out how it should be before I've even opened Excel, because I've asked that question, how do you want to do it? But something to think about, and this is really, you kind of hit the extreme of Excel when you're at this point, but it is something to think about. The way Excel's calculation engine works in the dependency tree, you may lose some optimization, or you may notice the file slow down a bit if your outputs are at the beginning. If the flow of the logic is from inputs to calculations to outputs, you may notice it. But you've kind of, 99% of models you won't notice, they'll all calculate instantly. If you're dealing with a real beast, and I've seen this in some of my files, that simple move, you will notice it slow down. So maybe that might be a factor too.
Putting the outputs at the front.
If you put them at the front, in extreme situations, you may notice the model slows down. Whether that's even a problem, it again depends. So no hard and fast right or wrong answer, but thinking about it from the client's perspective is how I'd say you can get to the way to go on any particular. I actually get that question a lot with my MBA students too. Let's think about the user outputs at the front. I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
If you're sending it to somebody who's probably at a lower level, and the first thing you want is a master sheet, and you might want them to change the date.
Yeah,
Okay, so
maybe, yeah.
You've got that master sheet where you do all the work,
Yes,
and then you get to sort of the end,
totally,
and then
100%.
print out that last tab.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like you're thinking about it right in that you're thinking about the user. And that's always going to get you in a better place if that's how you're thinking. Yeah.
How do you get to understand the system and how long does it normally take?
Yeah, again, there's no one answer to that because it does depend. Like Booktopia, for example, I spent 3 weeks before I even touched Excel. 3 weeks with them. And this is the job that was meant to take 2 to 3 days. And I remember calling my friend going, it's been 3 weeks, I haven't even opened Excel yet, you know, like, what did you sell me? But 3 weeks to understand their business, which if you think about it, they sell books online. At first glance doesn't sound too, how hard could that be? But when you get into the warehouse and all the particular things that go on, you find that actually there's quite a bit to it. I've done some work for Downer on some big infrastructure projects, 30 to 40 year contracts, and we'll spend months. Well, particularly my first one with them, I spent months getting my head around, building the trains, operating the trains, maintaining the trains, everything that goes into that, all the different people involved. And I ended up doing project after project with them. So I got a bit quicker as I learned a bit more. But, weeks, months, it's not out of the ordinary, depending on the project. Sometimes it could be days. I did a model for a startup. It's called Motherhood. It kind of is trying to disrupt childcare. That was a really nice 2 to 3 day job where it actually was 2 to 3 days. And I had a meeting with one of the founders. Sometimes with startups it's easier because you're talking to the founder and it really is all in that one person's head and you can get it out pretty swiftly. It's when you're dealing with big organizations with heaps of different people and you're getting different stories from different people. It's your job to decipher what's true and what's not. That can take a lot of time. But I find if you go whiteboard before keyboard, you're always going to end up better off than if you don't. Yeah. Anything else? I'm kind of conscious we're hitting 7:30. One more question and anything else I can take, separately. I'm happy. Sorry, last one.
Like, what do you do on the whiteboard?
On the whiteboard,
What kind of logical steps do you go?
Normally, if I'm starting like the absolute first meeting with the client, I'll often say pretend that whiteboard is the output worksheet. What needs to be on that whiteboard? And actually, I find that simple question leads to the whole conversation I have to have. Because they might go, you know what, I need to understand the trajectory of a particular product sales. So, okay, let's pretend that chart's there. How do I calculate that? What's going on there? And it's just one question after the other. Where I start is often pretend it's the output, what needs to be on it. I did a model not too long ago, a few months ago, for a transport logistics company, where actually that conversation I started with another kind of high-level question, which was, tell me how your business works. And from that question, I was then able to just have a conversation. And there is an art to being able to kind of both listen, talk, and capture all at the same time. And I actually think there's not enough training out there on good whiteboarding and how to do that well. I myself earlier attended a course called Presto Sketching at General Assembly. I found it really good. I learned a lot. That guy's a master. I can share that with you, but I reckon there's a real gap there in learning how to have those conversations. But I often find if you have a broad enough question that's going to let you then have the follow-up questions, you're kind of just guiding them through a conversation, capturing it on the whiteboard. I'll often take a photo, convert it into some other format, maybe a driver tree, reflect that back and go, what have I missed? And then we'll do it all again, and repeat. And it's only when I haven't missed anything, everyone's happy, I build the model, show it to them, and they go, that's not how it's meant to work. Oh, I forgot to tell you this, or I meant to tell you that. But, at least you minimise the pain. I think we'll leave it there, given the time. Thank you all for listening and your engagement.